Some stories begin with a grand adventure, but this one begins with a man who has run out of options and a woman nobody is prepared to understand. So get comfortable, settle in, and let's head back to the winter of 1833, deep into a mountain valley where trust was hard to earn. Survival came at a price, and one unexpected arrival was about to change everything. By the winter of 1833, the mountains had taken nearly everything Eamon Vale owned, except his name, his cabin, and the stubborn breath that kept rising from his lungs each frozen morning. The valley where he lived had no official name on any government map. Trappers called it Coldwater Basin because the river that cut through its center stayed bitter enough to numb a man's fingers even in July. 2 walls of dark timber and stone rose on either side, and beyond them stood the higher peaks, white most of the year and sharp enough to catch the last light long after the valley floor had gone dark. There was only one dependable route, in or out. It followed the river for 12 miles, climbed through a narrow mountain pass, and descended toward Pell's trading house, the nearest place where a person could buy flour, powder, salt, lamp oil, needles, or news from the settlements. The trading house belonged to the North Continental Fur and Freight Company, but everyone in the region simply called it Pell's. Ambrose Pell had managed the post for 6 years. He wore clean wool coats, polished boots, and a silver watch that he checked, even when there was nowhere important to be. He rarely raised his voice. He did not need to. A trapper who depended on Pell for powder and provisions understood the danger in a quiet smile, just as well as he understood the danger in a wolf's exposed teeth. Eamon had understood too late. He had arrived in the valley 9 years earlier with 2 pack mules, 3 steel traps, a borrowed rifle, and the confidence of a man not yet acquainted with the full price of isolation. He was 27 then, broad-shouldered and quick to laugh, with dark hair that curled at the ends when it rained. He had spent his childhood hauling timber in the Allegheny foothills, where his father taught him that land could be made to respect a man if the man worked longer than the weather. After his father died, the family farm went to Eamon's older brother. Eamon received a wagon, a small share of cash, and the freedom to go anywhere he pleased. At first, that freedom had felt like wealth. He followed freight roads west, hunted for survey camps, guided 2 army detachments through river country, and eventually heard of Coldwater Basin from an old French trapper who claimed the beaver there were so plentiful that a man could step across the river on their backs. The old trapper had lied about the beaver, but he had not lied about the valley. Eamon loved it from the moment he first saw it. He loved the clean silence before dawn, the way elk trails appeared between the pines, and the fierce blue of the sky after a storm. He loved that every wall, fence, shed, and bridge existed only if his hands put it there. He built a cabin on a rise above the river, set traplines along 5 tributaries, and cut a trail toward the pass wide enough for a pack string. For several years, the valley rewarded him. His pelts brought fair prices. His garden produced potatoes, onions, beans, squash, and enough corn to grind through winter. He traded cured hides for iron, coffee, and tobacco. He saved money in a small wooden box under the floorboards, and imagined that one day he might build a second room onto the cabin. Then the winters grew harder. A flood tore out 2 miles of his best trapline. Disease reduced the beaver. The market price for common pelts fell. 1 mule broke a leg on the pass and had to be put down. Another disappeared during a late spring storm and was found 2 weeks later beneath a fallen spruce. Each loss alone had been survivable. Together, they became debt. Pell advanced Eamon flour when the harvest failed, powder when a shipment was delayed, and a new pack saddle when the old one cracked. He recorded every purchase in the trading house ledger and assured Eamon that the account would balance once the winter pelts came in. The account never balanced. Somehow the finest pelts were always graded as damaged. The weights were always lower than Eamon remembered. Interest appeared where none had been discussed. A keg of salt cost more on paper than it had when Pell quoted the price across the counter. Eamon questioned the figures twice. The first time, Pell smiled and showed him columns of numbers. The second time, Pell stopped smiling. "You're welcome to take your trade elsewhere," he said. There was nowhere else. By the autumn of 1833, Eamon's debt had grown to a number so large it no longer seemed connected to flour, powder, or salt. Pell claimed Eamon owed the company $487. It was more money than Eamon could earn in 3 good years. Pell offered a solution. He would take title to the cabin, the lower traplines, and a strip of land controlling the mountain pass. In exchange, he would clear the account and allow Eamon to remain as a hired caretaker. Eamon refused. Pell gave him until the first deep snow to reconsider. That was when Eamon decided he needed a wife. The decision was not romantic. He had not sat alone by the fire dreaming of companionship. He needed someone who could preserve meat, tend a garden, mend harness, manage supplies, and keep the cabin running while he spent weeks on the traplines. A second capable person could mean the difference between losing the property and surviving long enough to challenge Pell's account. He wrote a letter to a church agent in Independence, Missouri, who arranged introductions between women seeking husbands and men living in Western territories. Eamon's message was plain: remote mountain holding, hard winters, honest work. Seeking practical woman of strong constitution. Must know food preservation, livestock care, and household management. Marriage intended upon mutual agreement. He did not mention the debt. He did not mention Pell. He did not mention that his smokehouse contained less than 1 month's meat, or that he had begun mixing ground bark into the mule feed to make it last. He expected no answer. 6 weeks later, a freight driver brought a letter sealed with dark blue wax. A woman named Sabine Orrell had accepted. She wrote that she was 32 years old, healthy, experienced with animals and remote travel, and willing to live under difficult conditions provided the arrangement was respectful and clearly defined. Her handwriting was sharp and even. Eamon read the letter 3 times and decided that respectful and clearly defined meant she understood the practical nature of the arrangement. She was expected to arrive before the end of November. The first heavy snow came early. By the time the freight wagon appeared at the base of the pass, Eamon had nearly stopped believing it would come at all. He saw it from the ridge above his cabin, a dark shape moving slowly between the pines. 1 wagon, 2 horses, and a driver bent against the wind. Eamon saddled his remaining mule and rode down to meet them. The wagon stopped beside a frozen creek. The driver climbed down first. He was a narrow man with frost in his beard and irritation in every movement. "You Vale?" he called. "I am." The driver jerked his thumb toward the rear of the wagon. "Then she's yours." A woman stepped down before Eamon could answer. She was taller than he expected, nearly level with his eyes when she stood straight. She wore a long gray traveling coat, belted firmly at the waist, heavy boots, and dark gloves. Her black hair was pinned beneath a felt hat that had survived the road better than the driver had. A narrow scar crossed the edge of her left eyebrow. She carried no carpet bag. Instead, she handed Eamon a long rifle in a weatherproof sleeve, then lifted a brass-clasped leather ledger from beneath the wagon seat. "Careful with that," she said. Eamon looked at the rifle. "I meant the ledger." Her voice was calm, low, and entirely untroubled by the cold. The driver dragged down 2 wooden trunks and a canvas-wrapped case. "That's the last of it," he said. "Road's closing. I'm turning back before I lose the team." Sabine faced him. "You agreed to deliver me to the cabin. I agreed to bring you into the basin. The cabin is in the basin. So is half the mountain." Sabine held his gaze until the driver shifted his weight. Eamon cleared his throat. "I can take her from here." The driver climbed onto the wagon without argument. He snapped the reins, and the horses turned with visible reluctance. Sabine watched until the wagon disappeared among the trees. Then she looked at Eamon. "You are Eamon Vale." "Yes." "You stated that your cabin was 4 miles from the western descent." "It is." "The driver says it is 8. 6, perhaps." "You also stated that the trail was passable by wagon." "In summer." "It is November." Eamon adjusted the rifle in his hands. "It was summer when I wrote the letter." For the first time, something changed in her expression. It was not amusement exactly, but it stood close beside it. Is the rest of your description equally seasonal? No. Good. Then we should move before dark. He had expected nervousness, questions, perhaps a complaint about the cold. Instead, Sabine examined the mule, tightened the girth, repacked her own trunks to balance the load, and secured the ledger beneath her coat. You know animals, Eamon said. I told you I did. Most people say they know animals because they once owned a milk cow. Most people say many things. She walked beside the mule rather than ride. Eamon led them uphill. The trail had narrowed beneath the snow. Twice they stopped to clear fallen branches. Sabine never asked how far remained, though her breathing grew heavier on the steepest climb. Near sunset, they reached the rise above the cabin. Smoke rose from the stone chimney. The barn stood behind the house, patched in 3 kinds of wood. Beyond it, a small fenced garden lay buried beneath snow. The river moved below, dark and narrow between shelves of ice. Sabine stopped. Eamon waited for her verdict. It is smaller than I imagined, she said. The cabin, the valley, it feels larger in summer. Another seasonal fact? That one is true. She studied the buildings, the slope, the forest, and the trail leading east toward the pass. Where is your smokehouse? Behind the barn. How much meat is stored? Enough for a while. How long is a while? Eamon looked toward the cabin. We should get a fire going. There is already smoke. A stronger fire. Sabine said nothing. That silence followed him all the way to the door. Inside, the cabin was warm but poorly ordered. Traps hung from pegs near the entrance. Coils of rope, harness, tools, and 2 sacks of potatoes occupied one corner. A heavy table stood beneath the only window. The bed was separated from the main room by a rough plank partition that stopped a foot below the rafters. Sabine removed her coat and gloves. She wore a dark wool dress made for movement rather than appearance. A leather belt held a small knife, a pencil, and a folding rule. Eamon set her rifle against the wall. Your room is there, he said, pointing behind the partition. I've put fresh straw in the mattress. She looked at the bed, then at him. And where will you sleep? By the fire. You intend to sleep by the fire until we are married. That seemed proper. It is. He waited. She walked to the shelves, opened a tin, smelled it, and put it back. She checked the flour sack, counted the onions, examined the potatoes, and lifted the lid of the salt barrel. You have enough flour for 12 days, she said. Longer if used carefully. Your potatoes are beginning to rot. Only a few. Your salt is damp, your beans have weevils, and half your onions are frozen. You've been here less than 5 minutes. Rot does not become polite because I am newly arrived. Eamon felt heat rise in his face. I sent for a wife, not an inspector. Sabine turned. You sent for a practical woman capable of managing a winter household. That begins with knowing whether the household can survive winter. It can. How much meat is in the smokehouse? He did not answer. She picked up the lantern. Show me. The smokehouse contained 2 venison haunches, a small bundle of smoked trout, and a barrel with 6 pieces of salt pork. Sabine stood in the doorway while the lantern flame moved in the wind. This is not enough for 2 adults until spring. I know. How many animals? 1 mule, 2 pack goats, and a mare. Feed? 6 weeks. Winter? 4 months if it is mild. Sabine closed the smokehouse door. You did not describe this in your letter. I described hard winters. You described work. You did not describe insolvency. Eamon took the lantern from her. I didn't ask you to come here to discuss my accounts. No. You asked me to come preserve meat you do not have, tend animals you cannot feed, and manage provisions that are nearly gone. I will hunt. With what powder? He looked at her sharply. She had seen the powder horn beside the rifle rack. It was nearly empty. I can buy more at the trading post. With what money? Eamon stepped toward the cabin. This was a mistake. Sabine remained where she was. Possibly. You can return when the pass opens. That will be 5 months. Then we will make the best of it. I had already planned to. He turned. She held his gaze in the cold. But I will not be treated as a servant you ordered from a catalogue, she said. I traveled nearly 1,000 miles because you offered partnership in a difficult life. If partnership is not what you intended, say so now. Eamon had no immediate answer. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of wood smoke and frozen pine. At last he said, "I need help." "That is honest. I don't know whether partnership is possible." "Neither do I. That is what mutual agreement means." He looked toward the mountains, already fading into darkness. "All right." "All right what?" "We manage the winter first. We decide the rest later." Sabine nodded. "That is clearly defined." The next morning, she reorganized his life. She separated usable food from spoiled food, cleaned the shelves, dried the salt, and moved the remaining onions beneath the floor, where the temperature stayed steady. She found weevils in 2 sacks of beans, sifted the beans through wire mesh, and roasted them lightly to prevent further infestation. She inventoried every tool, trap, blanket, animal, cartridge, and pound of feed. Eamon watched for an hour before his patience failed. "Do you intend to count the nails in the roof?" "If the roof begins leaking, I may. I know what I own. You know where most of it is. That is not the same thing." He put on his coat. "I'm checking the northern line. Take food. I won't be gone long. Those are the preferred last words of unprepared men." He turned slowly. Sabine handed him a cloth-wrapped package. "What is it?" "Bread, cheese, dried apple, and enough sense to keep your strength up." He almost refused it. Then he saw that she was not mocking him. She was simply prepared. He took the package. When he returned at dusk, he brought 2 muskrats and a fox pelt. Sabine had repaired the torn grain sacks, cleaned the stovepipe, and made stew from the worst potatoes. The stew was thin but hot. They ate across from each other in the firelight. "Where did you learn to keep expedition accounts?" Eamon asked, glancing at the brass-clasped ledger beside her plate. "My father supplied survey parties." "What kind of surveys?" "Roads, river routes, military boundaries, freight corridors." He began as a cartographer and ended as a quartermaster, because he understood that lines on a map mean nothing if people cannot reach them alive. "You traveled with him from the age of 12. That explains the rifle. The rifle requires no explanation." He looked at the long weapon near the wall. "It is a fine piece. It belonged to my mother." Eamon waited, but Sabine offered nothing further. "What happened to your father?" "He trusted the wrong company." The answer came flat and quick. Eamon recognized a closed door and did not push it. For the next week, they settled into an uneasy routine. Eamon rose before dawn to check traps and hunt. Sabine tended the animals, repaired equipment, stretched pelts, prepared food, and studied the valley. She asked about creek crossings, snow depth, old trails, avalanche slopes, and abandoned camps. At night, she copied information into her ledger. Eamon believed she was recording household matters until he saw the headings: freight distance, winter passability, water access, grazing capacity, storage volume, defensible approaches. He tapped the last line. Defensible against what? Fire, theft, animals, and men. Do you expect an army? No. Then why record it? Because isolation makes every danger larger. He sat opposite her. You think I'm a fool. I think you are exhausted. That is not an answer. It is the answer. Exhaustion makes capable people accept explanations they would reject under better conditions. Eamon leaned back. And what explanation have I accepted? That your failures are entirely your own. The fire cracked between them. He looked at her for a long moment. You've been here 8 days. That is enough to know the lower trapline was cut deliberately. His body stiffened. What? 3 anchor stakes were removed and reset downstream. The traps were not lost to floodwater. Someone moved them. You inspected my line. I inspected the riverbank while gathering willow bark. That line is 2 miles away. I needed a long walk. Eamon rose so quickly that the bench scraped the floor. Show me. They left at first light. Snow had fallen overnight, covering recent tracks, but Sabine led him to the old stake holes. The ground beneath the snow showed where iron had once been driven deep into the bank. Farther downstream, one surviving trap was tied with a knot Eamon never used. He crouched beside it. I thought the flood took them. The flood moved debris east, Sabine said. This stake was dragged west. Who would do this? Someone who benefits when your catch declines. Eamon stood. Pell? Possibly. Or someone working for him. He has no reason to sabotage my lines. I already owe him. That may be the reason. He stared at the river. No. Why not? Because if I fail completely, he gets nothing. He gets the pass. Eamon turned. Sabine opened her ledger and showed him the map she had drawn. His cabin controlled the only gentle approach to the mountain pass. Freight wagons could cross the basin only by using the trail he maintained. Any company holding his land could charge passage, station animals, store goods, and control movement through the region. I never thought the trail was worth much, he said. To a trapper, perhaps not. To a freight company, it is worth more than pelts. Eamon looked toward the distant ridge. Pell's offer returned to him in new language. The cabin, the lower traplines, the strip of land controlling the pass. You believe he has been ruining me to take the route. I believe we should examine the account before deciding. They rode to the trading post 2 days later. Pell's stood in a broad clearing surrounded by sheds, corrals, and stacked freight. Smoke rose from 3 chimneys. A faded company flag hung above the storehouse. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, leather, tobacco, and wet wool. Ambrose Pell stood behind the counter, speaking with a freight captain. He was a handsome man in his 40s, with pale hair combed neatly away from his forehead, and the soft hands of someone who profited from work done by others. He saw Eamon and smiled. Vale, I had begun to think the snow had buried you. Not yet. Pell's gaze shifted to Sabine. And this must be the lady from Missouri. Sabine Orrell, she said. Pell came around the counter and bowed slightly. Ambrose Pell, I hope our wilderness has not been too severe. I have seen worse. Have you? Yes. Something in her tone made Pell study her more carefully. Eamon set 3 pelts on the counter. Fox, marten, and 2 muskrats. Pell inspected them with quick fingers. Fox is rubbed. Marten has guard hair damage. Muskrats are small. They are clean winter pelts. They are 2nd grade. Last year, these would have been 1st. Markets change. Show me the posted prices. Pell's smile thinned. The prices are in the company book. I'd like to see my account, Eamon said. Pell became still. You know the balance. I want to see the entries. That is unusual. Is it forbidden? No, merely unusual. Pell retrieved a large ledger from beneath the counter and opened it to Eamon's name. The page held years of purchases, credits, charges, and interest. Eamon stared at the columns. Numbers had never frightened him, but they had never welcomed him either. He understood totals, weights, and prices. He did not easily follow compound calculations or abbreviations used by company clerks. Sabine stepped beside him. May I? Pell placed one finger on the ledger. Company records are not for casual examination. She is examining my account. She is not the account holder. Eamon looked at him. She is with me. The room quieted. Pell lifted his hand. Sabine read without speaking. Her eyes moved down the page, then back up. She turned one page, then another. What is this freight surcharge? She asked. Transportation adjustment. For goods delivered from where? St. Louis. This flour came from Fort Benton. Pell smiled politely. You are mistaken. The barrel mark is still visible in his cabin. That proves where it was barreled, not how it traveled. Sabine touched another entry. Interest was added twice in April. One is a late fee. It is marked interest, a clerical shorthand. And this purchase on March 17th. Pell glanced down. 20 pounds of salt, 12 pounds of coffee, a coil of rope, and 2 pounds of lead. Eamon, were you here on March 17th? No. Pell looked up. How can you be certain? The pass was closed, Eamon said. Avalanche took the east slope. Nobody crossed until April. Pell's expression did not change. You may be mistaken about the date. I spent 3 weeks digging out the trail. Sabine examined the ink. This entry was written after the one beneath it. Entries are not always recorded in order. The running balance was adjusted as though it had been. Pell closed the ledger. That is enough. Sabine placed her gloved hand on the cover before he could pull it away. Not nearly. His eyes lifted to hers. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Pell spoke quietly. Mrs. Orrell, men who live in these mountains survive by maintaining useful relationships. Vale has benefited from this company's patience for years. Patience does not usually earn compound interest. You have been in the basin less than 2 weeks, and already your arithmetic is disappointing. Eamon expected Pell to become angry. Instead, the manager smiled. It was the coldest expression Eamon had ever seen on his face. "I hope you enjoy the winter," Pell said. Sabine removed her hand from the ledger. "We intend to." On the ride home, Eamon said little. The evidence was not yet proof, but it had given shape to every suspicion he had forced himself to ignore. Sabine rode the mare while he walked beside the mule. "You should have told me about the debt," she said. "I thought you might not come." "I might not have. That is why." She looked down at him. "You preferred a wife who arrived without informed consent. I preferred not to freeze alone. That is an explanation, not an excuse." He stopped walking. The mule pulled at the reins. "I know." Sabine studied him. Eamon looked toward the trees. "I was ashamed," he said. "Every year I worked harder, and every year I owed more. Pell showed me the account, and I could never find the point where it turned against me. I began thinking perhaps I had become careless, or stupid. You are neither. You've known me 2 weeks. I know the difference between a poor manager and a man being robbed." The words struck him harder than comfort would have. He started walking again. "I'm sorry I lied by omission. That phrase exists to make lying sound mannerly. I'm sorry I lied." "Good. Are you leaving in spring?" "I have not decided." The honesty hurt, but he respected it. "What will decide you?" "The same thing that should decide any partnership." "And what is that?" "Whether we make each other stronger." When they returned to the cabin, Sabine opened her brass-clasped ledger and began reconstructing Eamon's account from memory. She had memorized dates, amounts, abbreviations, and balances. Eamon watched in disbelief. "You remember all that?" "Not all of it. You have written 4 pages. 5. Why carry an expedition ledger across the country?" Her pencil stopped. "My father's last company altered supply accounts during a government road survey," she said. "They billed for animals that never existed, food that never arrived, and wages paid to dead men. When my father questioned the records, they blamed him. What happened? He was arrested for theft." Eamon lowered himself into the chair opposite her. "Was he convicted?" "He died before trial." The fire shifted. Sabine continued writing. "He spent his final months trying to reconstruct the accounts from memory. I helped him. We proved enough to clear his name after his death, but not enough to recover what the company took. I'm sorry. So am I. Is that why you came west?" "It is one reason. What are the others?" She looked at him. "In St. Louis, a woman who is skilled with ledgers may be permitted to copy numbers. She is rarely permitted to question them. I had grown tired of asking permission to be useful." Eamon nodded toward the open pages. "You don't ask often." "No." Over the following days, they built a case. Eamon searched old receipts, freight tags, and letters. Sabine compared prices, dates, and weights. They discovered charges for supplies delivered while Eamon was away, interest calculated above the rate written in his original agreement, and credits for pelts reduced without explanation. The largest discrepancy concerned a shipment of 43 beaver pelts from 2 winters earlier. Pell's ledger showed 31 pelts, most second grade. Eamon found a letter from a freight captain thanking him for the 43 clean skins loaded at Coldwater. Sabine placed the letter beside her calculations. "This alone erases nearly a quarter of the claimed balance. If Pell admits the price, he will not. Then what good is it? It establishes a pattern. For whom? Someone with authority over the company." Eamon laughed without humor. "Authority is a long distance from here. Not as far as Pell believes." She explained that territorial trade stations operating on public routes were subject to freight, tax, and contract review. A company could manipulate prices, but it could not falsify shipments or impose charges forbidden by charter. "Who reviews them?" Eamon asked. "An auditor. You know one." "I know the name of one. Cecily Rusk." "A woman?" Sabine's eyes lifted. Eamon raised both hands. "I meant no insult. You meant surprise." "I did. Miss Rusk audited my father's case. She was the first official who believed the numbers rather than the company. Where is she? Fort Holloway, according to the last government circular I saw. That is 4 days beyond Pell's, 5 in winter. And how do we reach her without Pell knowing? We do not need to reach her, a message does. 3 mornings later, a small party of independent hunters stopped at the cabin on their way east. Sabine gave their leader a sealed packet, addressed to Cecily Rusk. Inside were copied entries, the freight captain's letter, and a description of Pell's accounting practices. If the trading post asks what I gave you, she said. The hunter tucked the packet inside his shirt. I tell them it's a love letter. Eamon glanced at Sabine. She did not smile. Tell them nothing, she said. The men departed before noon. Pell arrived the following afternoon. He came on horseback with Constable Asa Venn and 2 company guards. Venn was a heavy, uncertain man with a rust-colored beard and a badge pinned to a coat too thin for the weather. Eamon saw them from the barn and walked into the yard with his rifle in one hand. Sabine came out behind him carrying her ledger. Pell dismounted. Vale, he said. I hoped we could avoid unpleasantness. You usually do. Venn removed a folded document from his coat. I have an order of possession, he said. Trading company claims lawful title to the cabin, outbuildings, pass trail, and lower watershed. Eamon stared at him. That is my land. Pell's face held mild regret. It was pledged as security. I pledged pelt revenue. You pledged the holding. I signed no such agreement. Pell nodded toward the constable. Venn unfolded the document. At the bottom appeared Eamon's name and a rough mark beside it. Eamon stepped forward. That is forged. Pell sighed. You made your mark before witnesses. I can write my own name. The agreement permitted either signature or mark. I did neither. Venn shifted his feet. I'm required to enforce the order. Sabine walked down the steps. May I see the contract? Pell answered before Venn could. No. Sabine looked at the constable. Are you taking legal possession based on a document the accused party is forbidden to inspect? Venn frowned. He can inspect it. Pell's jaw tightened. The constable handed Sabine the page. She read slowly. Eamon watched her eyes narrow. The document stated that he had pledged the property on June 6, 1831, as security for a consolidated supply loan. It listed 3 freight shipments as consideration, and named Ambrose Pell and a company clerk as witnesses. Sabine turned the sheet toward the light. What day of the week was June 6, 1831? She asked. Venn blinked. I don't know. Monday, Pell said. It was not. Pell looked at her. Sabine opened her ledger. It was Saturday. More importantly, Mr. Vale was guiding the Barrow survey party that week. Their route journal places him 70 miles north. That proves nothing, Pell said. It proves he could not have signed this in your office. He may have signed earlier. The agreement states it was executed in the presence of both witnesses on June 6th. Pell's composure tightened at the edges. Sabine continued. The contract also lists a shipment of milled flour and lamp oil delivered as consideration on May 28th. Yes, the freight road was closed after the Cottonwood Bridge collapse until June 19th. The bridge repair was recorded by the Territorial Works Office. Venn looked at Pell. The manager's voice remained calm. Goods arrived by pack train. Then why was a wagon freight surcharge added? Pell did not answer. Sabine held the page closer to the window. This paper is less than a year old. Venn looked confused. How can you know that? The mill watermark. Barlow and Finch changed their mark in 1832. The contract is dated 1831. Pell took one step toward her. That is speculation. Sabine folded the document carefully. It is enough to prevent an honest constable from seizing a home today. All eyes moved to Venn. The constable's face reddened. Pell spoke softly. Asa, you have an order. I have a questionable document, Venn said. You have a duty. I also have a jail with a broken stove and no desire to explain to a territorial judge why I enforced a forged claim. Pell's eyes became flat. Venn took the contract from Sabine. I'm delaying possession until the record is reviewed. You will regret that, Pell said. The constable swallowed. Maybe. Pell turned toward Eamon. This changes nothing. The debt remains. Eamon held his rifle at his side. No, he said. The numbers remain. The debt is beginning to change. Pell mounted his horse. Before leaving, he looked at Sabine. You have mistaken isolation for protection. Sabine met his gaze. And you have mistaken politeness for fear. The riders disappeared into the trees. Ven remained behind for several seconds. I never liked that contract, he muttered. Yet you brought it, Eamon said. The constable looked ashamed. I brought what I was ordered to enforce. By whom? Sabine asked. Ven hesitated. The county magistrate signed it. After seeing the original account, I doubt he saw anything beyond Pell's summary. Then tell him the summary is false. Ven looked down the trail. Pell has friends. So do honest records, Sabine said. The constable gave her an uneasy look. I hope they shoot straighter. He rode away. That night, Eamon reinforced the shutters. Sabine moved the reconstructed ledger from the table. Where will you hide it? He asked. Not in the cabin. It may snow. The ledger is wrapped in oilcloth. That does not answer me. It is safer if you do not know. I live here. And if men put a rifle against your head. Eamon stared at her. You believe Pell will go that far? I believe forged contracts are not the work of a man who intends to stop because someone noticed. She took the ledger outside. Eamon watched through the window but could not see where she went. She returned 20 minutes later with snow on her shoulders. Done, she said. The first attack came 2 nights later. Eamon woke to the smell of smoke. He rolled from the blanket beside the hearth and saw orange light moving beyond the rear window. The smokehouse, he said. Sabine was already out of bed. She pulled on her boots, took the rifle, and ran outside. Flames climbed the smokehouse wall. A figure moved near the barn. Eamon grabbed a bucket and shouted. The figure ran. Sabine raised her rifle. The shot cracked across the yard. The fleeing man stumbled and fell near the fence. Eamon stopped. You hit him! In the leg! A second man emerged from behind the barn and fired toward the cabin. The ball struck the wood beside Sabine. Eamon fired back, and the man vanished into the trees. Water first, Sabine said. They formed no bucket line because there were only 2 of them. They threw snow, carried water from the animal trough, and tore burning boards away with an iron hook. By the time the fire died, the smokehouse roof had collapsed. Most of the remaining meat was ruined. Eamon stood in the steaming wreckage, black water running from his sleeves. The winter had just become nearly impossible. Sabine touched his arm. The man by the fence is alive. They found him trying to crawl into the trees. He was young, perhaps 20, with a thin face and a company freight coat. Blood darkened his trouser leg below the knee, but the wound was clean and not immediately dangerous. Eamon recognized him. Lucan Meyer. The young man looked away. You work Pell's freight yard, Eamon said. I only load wagons. You just burned my stores. Lucan's teeth chattered. They said the cabin would be empty. Who said? Lucan closed his eyes. Sabine knelt and examined the wound. The ball passed through the outer calf, she said. No bone. Are you going to kill me? Lucan whispered. No, Eamon said. Sabine looked at him. Not if you answer questions. They carried Lucan inside, cut away the torn cloth, cleaned the wound, and bound it. Eamon wanted to drag the truth out of him immediately. Sabine insisted on warming him first. A frightened man will say anything, she said quietly. A man who believes he may live has reason to tell the truth carefully. Lucan drank broth with shaking hands. The second attacker, he said, was a company guard named Doric. Pell had ordered them to destroy the meat, burn the barn if possible, and find Sabine's ledger. How does he know about the ledger? Eamon asked. Doric saw her writing at the post. What else did Pell tell you? Lucan stared into the cup. Nothing. Sabine sat across from him. You entered the yard from the north. He looked up. Most men would approach from the west trail. You came from the north because you had already inspected the property. Lucan said nothing. You knew where the smokehouse stood. You knew which window faced the barn. You knew the dog was gone. Eamon looked sharply at him. His old hound had disappeared 10 days earlier. Sabine continued. This was not the first time you came here. Lucan's eyes filled with panic. I didn't hurt the dog. Who did? Doric. He poisoned it. Eamon rose. The table moved under his hand. Sabine did not look away from Lucan. How many men are coming? The young freight hand's face went pale. I don't know. How many? 8. Maybe 10. When? 2 nights from now. Eamon stared at him. Lucan spoke faster. Pell says the constable will not return before the weather breaks. He says there will be an accident. Cabin fire. Ammunition explosion. Something people will believe. And the pass? Sabine asked. He has a crew ready to occupy it. Why is the pass so important now? Lucan looked at her. Army freight contract. New route from Fort Holloway. Pell says whoever controls Coldwater can charge every wagon heading north. The room became very quiet. Sabine's earlier conclusion had been correct. This was larger than Eamon's debt. Pell intended to turn the basin into a company station and use Eamon's ruin as the legal foundation. Eamon paced near the stove. We leave at dawn. Sabine looked at him. Where? East. We take the animals and reach Venn. Pell will have men watching the road. Then we go south. The south ridge is avalanche ground. We cannot remain here against 10 men. We do not need to fight 10 men in the open. Eamon stopped. You think this is one of your expedition problems? It is exactly an expedition problem. Limited people, limited supplies, hostile terrain, a predictable enemy. This is my home. That makes the terrain more useful, not less. You could be killed. So could you. I brought you here under false terms. I will not keep you here for this. Sabine stood. You did not bring me here. I chose to come. You did not choose Pell. Neither did you. Sabine, I have spent half my life watching powerful men win because decent people believed resistance required permission. Her voice remained level, but something fierce moved beneath it. Pell believes the valley is empty, except for one exhausted trapper and the woman he ordered to cook for him. That belief is the greatest advantage we possess. Eamon looked at her. Lucan watched from the bed, afraid to breathe. Sabine stepped closer. We cannot outrun mounted men through deep snow. We cannot abandon the evidence, and we cannot allow Pell to control the pass before Rusk receives my warning. You assume the warning reached her. I assume nothing. I prepare for both possibilities. Eamon rubbed both hands over his face. What do you propose? She opened her ledger to the map of the valley. We make Pell come where his numbers cannot help him. The next 48 hours changed the cabin from a failing homestead into a defended position. Sabine did not build traps designed to kill. Dead men could not testify, and bodies would allow Pell's allies to call the attack a private feud. She wanted witnesses, captives, and evidence. They moved the animals to an abandoned line shack hidden behind a stand of fur. Lucan, unable to walk far, was placed in a sled and taken with them. He protested until Sabine told him Pell's men would likely kill him for failing. That ended the argument. Eamon showed Sabine an old freight cut through Crow Ravine, a narrow channel west of the cabin. Its walls rose steeply on both sides, and the trail passed between 2 shelves of stone before opening into the yard. During summer, wagons used the wider eastern approach. In winter, snowdrifts made the ravine appear to be the easier route. It was not. A concealed drainage ditch crossed the trail beneath loose snow. Eamon widened it and covered it lightly with branches. A rider moving quickly would lose balance but likely survive. They stretched ropes between trees to close the rear approach after Pell's men entered. They prepared lanterns in 3 locations to create the appearance of additional defenders. Sabine marked firing positions with clear lines toward rocks and tree trunks, not men. Warning shots? Eamon asked. Until they choose otherwise. And after? We remain alive. They carried extra ammunition to the loft. Eamon reinforced the cabin door with a crossbar. Sabine filled buckets and tubs with water in case Pell again used fire. The brass-clasped ledger remained hidden. Will you tell me now? Eamon asked. No. You still think I might be questioned at rifle point. I think you talk in your sleep. I do not. You argue with someone named Matthew, my brother. You lose every argument. That proves it is not real. Despite everything, she smiled. It was the first full smile he had seen from her. The sight unsettled him more than gunfire. By the evening of the expected attack, snow began falling. Lucan sat in the line shack with a pistol, food, water, and strict instructions not to leave unless the cabin burned completely. "You trust him with a weapon?" Eamon asked as they returned. "I trust him to prefer living." They ate before dark. Sabine checked the rifle, then opened her ledger to a blank page. "What are you writing?" Eamon asked. "A statement." "For whom?" "Whoever finds it." He sat opposite her. "That is cheerful. It is practical." "What does it say?" "That Ambrose Pell falsified accounts, forged a land contract, ordered the destruction of property, and planned an armed seizure of Coldwater Pass. You left out that he is vain. Difficult to prove." Eamon watched her write. "Sabine," she stopped. "If we survive tonight, and if Pell is stopped, and if the auditor clears the debt, that is a generous collection of conditions. I know. Continue. I don't want you to leave in spring." She looked at him. The cabin seemed suddenly smaller than it had during any storm. Eamon forced himself to continue. "I sent for someone to carry half my work. I thought that was partnership. It wasn't. It was convenience. You came here and saw what I could not see, because pride had narrowed my thinking. You have treated this land as though it matters, even though it belongs to a man who lied to you." Sabine's expression softened, but she said nothing. "I do not want an obedient helper," he said. "I do not think I ever truly did. I was simply afraid of needing someone who might judge me. And now? Now I know you judge accurately." She gave him a dry look. "That is not usually considered romantic. I have little experience. That is evident." He looked down at his hands. "I would like you to stay as my equal, not because I need the labor, because the valley is different when you are in it." The wind pressed snow against the window. Sabine closed the ledger. "When I accepted your letter," she said, "I expected a practical arrangement with a lonely man. I did not expect fraud, arson, or a private war over a mountain pass. I should have been more specific. You should have." She reached across the table and laid her hand over his. "I have not decided whether to marry you. I understand, but I have decided not to leave." Eamon released a breath. "That is enough. For tonight." For tonight. The first lantern signal appeared near midnight. A shadow crossed the western tree line, blocking the light for 1 second. Then another. Eamon and Sabine moved to their positions. The cabin fire had been banked low. From outside, the building appeared quiet. Hooves entered Crow Ravine. The riders moved slowly at first, then faster when they saw the open yard. The lead horse struck the concealed ditch. It stumbled, throwing its rider into the snow. 2 horses behind it collided. Men shouted. Another rider tried to turn, but Eamon pulled the rope that dropped a timber barrier across the rear trail. Sabine fired into the stone wall above them. The crack echoed through the ravine. "Dismount and put down your weapons," she called. "You are entering private property under armed threat. Your names and purpose will be recorded." A man fired toward the cabin. The ball struck the shutter. Eamon shot the lantern beside the man's horse. Glass shattered, and darkness swallowed the center of the ravine. "Next one will be closer," Eamon shouted. Someone cursed. Pell's voice rose from behind the riders. "Vale, you are obstructing lawful possession." "You burned lawful possession 2 nights ago," Eamon answered. "Your debt has been called. Leave the property, and no one will be harmed." Sabine shifted behind the stone corner of the barn. "Ambrose Pell," she called. "Lucan Meyer is alive. He has confessed to the attack on the smokehouse and identified you as the man who ordered it." Silence followed. Then a rifle flashed from the ravine. The shot splintered the barn wall near Sabine's head. Eamon fired toward the muzzle flash. A man cried out and dropped his weapon, clutching his hand. Sabine moved to the next position. "Your men are trapped," she said. "The east approach is blocked. The animals are gone. The ledger is beyond your reach. At dawn, every surviving man here can choose whether to testify for you or against you." Pell answered with surprising calm. "There will be no dawn testimony." He ordered the men forward. 3 rushed the yard. Eamon fired low, striking the snow before them. Sabine fired into a fence rail beside the nearest attacker. The men scattered. Another circled toward the rear of the cabin and found the door barred. He began chopping at it with an axe. Sabine moved along the barn wall, sighted carefully, and shot the axe handle. The tool flew from the man's hands. "Walk away," she told him. He reached for his pistol. Eamon came around the corner with his rifle leveled. The man froze. "Do what she said." He raised his hands. The fight did not unfold like a heroic tale. It was confused, cold, and full of long periods in which no one knew where the next shot would come from. Snow blew across the yard. Horses screamed in the ravine. Men shouted contradictory orders. Two of Pell's hired guards surrendered after realizing the eastern trail had been blocked by a fallen pine that Eamon and Sabine had prepared earlier. Doric, the man who had escaped after burning the smokehouse, tried to reach the barn loft. Sabine struck him across the wrist with the rifle stock before he could fire. Eamon wrestled him into the snow and tied his hands. Pell remained in the ravine with 3 men. "Burn the cabin!" he shouted. One man carried a bottle of lamp oil toward the wall. Sabine shot the bottle from his hand before he could light it. Oil spilled harmlessly into the snow. The man stared at the broken glass, then dropped the match. "I'm finished," he said. Pell cursed him. The last 2 guards hesitated. Eamon stepped into the open. His coat was torn, his cheek bleeding from a splinter, but his rifle remained steady. "Look around," he called. "Pell is behind you while you take the shots. Ask yourselves, what kind of man does that?" One guard lowered his weapon. Pell drew a pistol and aimed at him. Sabine fired. The shot struck the pistol, knocking it from Pell's hand. He cried out and fell against the ravine wall, holding his fingers. The remaining guard dropped his rifle. For several seconds, only the wind moved. Then Pell ran. He climbed over the fallen timber and scrambled toward the upper pass. Sabine started after him. Eamon caught her arm. "He knows the trail. So do I. The storm is worsening. He will reach the company horses at the east marker. Not if we take the cut." They left the surrendered men tied under guard of 2 others who had wisely decided cooperation might improve their circumstances. Doric was locked in the barn. Eamon and Sabine followed Pell's tracks through the trees. The snow filled them quickly. The upper cut crossed a steep slope above the pass. Eamon knew every turn, but the storm erased distance and direction. More than once, he stopped to listen for Pell. They found blood on a branch from the manager's injured hand. Farther ahead, a dark figure moved between the pines. "Pell!" Eamon shouted. "Stop!" Pell fired backward. The shot went wide. Sabine pushed Eamon behind a tree. "He has 1 shot left if it is a single pistol," she said. "He carries 2. Of course he does." They separated. Eamon moved downslope while Sabine climbed above the trail. Pell continued toward the pass, unaware that the path ahead narrowed between a rock wall and a drop into the river gorge. When he reached the narrowest section, Eamon stepped from the trees behind him. "It is over." Pell turned with the second pistol. Sabine's voice came from above. "Drop it." Pell looked up. She stood on the rock shelf with her rifle aimed at his chest. Snow gathered on her shoulders and hat. Pell laughed once. "You believe an auditor will save you. The company owns judges, freight lines, warehouses, and men whose names you will never know." Sabine's finger rested beside the trigger. "The company may own many things. It does not own this moment. You are a woman with a ledger." "Yes." He looked from her to Eamon. "And you," Pell said, "are still a bankrupt trapper who had to send east for a wife, because no woman who knew you would come willingly." Eamon felt the insult, but it no longer found the wound Pell expected. "She came willingly," he said. "Staying is the part I earned." Pell raised the pistol. Sabine fired into the rock at his feet. Stone fragments struck his boots. He flinched, lost balance, and dropped the weapon. Eamon crossed the distance and drove him against the rock wall. Pell struggled, but he had spent his life directing labor, not doing it. Eamon forced his arms behind him and bound his wrists with rawhide. They walked him back through the storm. Dawn came pale and slow. The sky turned gray above the peaks. Snow softened the damaged yard, covered bloodstains, and settled over the ruins of the smokehouse. Eamon stood near the barn with Sabine beside him, and Pell tied to a support post. 6 captured men sat under guard. 2 were wounded, none mortally. Lucan had left the line shack despite instructions and returned with the animals. Sabine looked at him. "I told you to remain hidden. I thought you might need the mare. You walked on an injured leg. I used the sled." "That was not the instruction." "No, ma'am." Eamon hid a smile. Then bells sounded on the eastern trail. Not one horse, a wagon, and several riders. Everyone in the yard turned. Pell's expression changed for the first time since his capture. The certainty left his face. The lead rider wore a dark blue government coat. Behind him came Constable Venn, 2 territorial officers, and a covered freight wagon. A woman rode beside the lead officer. She was in her late 40s, with silver threaded through brown hair and a square traveling hat secured beneath her chin. Her posture was straight despite the long ride. A leather document case hung from her saddle. Sabine stepped into the road. "Miss Rusk." Cecily Rusk dismounted. "Miss Orrell." They regarded one another for a moment with the restrained recognition of 2 people connected by old grief and unfinished business. Rusk looked at the burned smokehouse, the damaged cabin, the bound men, and Ambrose Pell. "I see your message understated the urgency." "It was urgent when I sent it." "So I gathered." Pell pulled against the rope. "This is an illegal detention. I demand release." Rusk turned toward him. "Ambrose Pell, manager of North Continental Fur and Freight Company Station 12. You know who I am. I know who your books claim you are." She opened the document case. "I also know Station 12 has reported freight volumes inconsistent with toll receipts, tax payments, and warehouse deposits for 3 consecutive years. Your company's central office claims to have remitted funds you never received. You claim to have purchased pelts that never reached company warehouses. Somewhere between those claims is a considerable amount of missing money." Pell's face went still. Rusk continued. "Miss Orrell's evidence gave us reason to examine your station records before you could alter them further." The lead officer stepped forward. "We secured the post yesterday afternoon. The clerk attempted to burn 2 account books." Pell said nothing. "The books survived," Rusk added. Constable Venn looked at Eamon. "I told the magistrate about the contract. He claimed he signed the order based on Pell's sworn statement." "Will he keep his office?" Eamon asked. Venn scratched his beard. "I would not wager on it." Cecily Rusk entered the cabin and spent the morning comparing documents. Sabine retrieved the hidden ledger from beneath a loose stone, inside an old spring box, 50 yards uphill. Eamon shook his head when she returned. "I checked that spring yesterday." "You checked for water?" Rusk reviewed every reconstructed charge, receipt, freight letter, and price discrepancy. Lucan gave a signed statement. 2 captured guards confirmed that Pell had ordered the armed seizure and promised payment from the company account. By noon, the structure of the fraud was clear. Pell had reduced pelt credits, inflated supply charges, and used false debts to seize land from isolated trappers. He then leased portions of the acquired routes back to the company through a separate partnership controlled by his cousin. The missing money had financed land purchases and private freight contracts. Eamon's account was one of 11 fraudulent accounts. Rusk closed the company ledger. "Mr. Vale, the legitimate balance of your account before damages is $32.11. Eamon stared at her. "What? You purchased supplies. Some debt is valid. Most is not." He looked at Sabine. $487 had become 32. Rusk continued. "The company owes you for undercredited pelts, unauthorized interest, destroyed property, and loss of provisions. Even a conservative calculation exceeds the legitimate balance." "My debt is gone?" "Yes." The words did not produce the reaction Eamon expected. He had imagined relief as something explosive. Instead, it moved through him quietly, loosening parts of his body that had been tight for years. He sat down. Sabine placed one hand on his shoulder. Pell was taken into territorial custody that afternoon. As the officers untied him from the post, he looked at Sabine. "You think this makes you powerful?" "No," she said. "It makes the record accurate." They led him away. The captured guards were transported with him. Lucan was placed in the wagon under temporary custody. but Rusk promised to record his cooperation. Before leaving, Lucan looked at Eamon. "I'm sorry about the dog." Eamon's jaw tightened. Lucan lowered his eyes. After a moment, Eamon said, "Tell the truth when they ask." "I will. And when you are free, find work that lets you sleep." Lucan nodded. Rusk remained 2 days to complete the initial audit. Before departing, she stood with Sabine near the river. Eamon watched from a distance, giving them privacy. "I received your letter about your father," Rusk said. Sabine looked toward the water. "That was years ago." "I know. You never answered." "I had no answer that would restore what was taken." "That did not prevent you from writing one." "No. Cowardice prevented me." Sabine turned. Rusk met her eyes. "I believed clearing his name was enough. It was not. The company officers who accused him kept their positions. The men who profited kept their money. I told myself the record had been corrected because I did not know how to correct the world around it." Sabine's expression remained guarded. "What changed? Age, regret, and the discovery that silence grows heavier rather than lighter." Rusk glanced toward the cabin. "You did what he tried to do." "We did." "Yes," Rusk said, noticing the correction. "You did." She held out her hand. Sabine looked at it, then accepted. When Rusk rode away, Eamon came down to the river. "Did you forgive her?" he asked. "No." "Will you?" "Possibly." "That sounds familiar." "It should." Winter remained difficult. Cleared debt did not restore burned meat or fill the grain bins. The territorial officers left 2 sacks of flour, dried beans, coffee, and salt from Pell's confiscated stock, but Eamon and Sabine still rationed carefully. They hunted together. Sabine proved patient with a rifle and impatient with snares. Eamon taught her to read the small changes in snow that revealed an animal's speed, weight, and direction. She taught him to preserve records with the same care he used on hides. They rebuilt the smokehouse in January. They repaired the barn roof in February. During storms, they sat beside the fire and planned for spring. Sabine believed the mountain pass could support more than a trapper's cabin. Freight crews needed shelter, feed, repairs, and safe storage. Travelers often risked the crossing because Pell's company offered no reliable station between the trading post and the northern route. "What are you proposing?" Eamon asked. "A lodge. We have 1 bed. We would build more. We have 1 table. Tables are less difficult than mountain passes. With what money? Compensation from the company, if it arrives. Then timber, labor, and trade. You make it sound simple. No, I make it sound possible." By March, Eamon had drawn plans for a bunkhouse, stable extension, and store shed. By April, the snow began to recede from the lower slopes. On the first warm afternoon, Eamon and Sabine walked to the pass. Meltwater ran beneath the ice. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. At the overlook, Coldwater Basin opened below them. Eamon rested both hands on the top rail of the old freight fence. "I received an unusual letter last autumn," he said. Sabine stood beside him. "Did you?" The woman who wrote it claimed to possess experience with animals, supplies, and difficult conditions. "She sounds impressive." She was demanding, practical, armed, prepared. She arrived with more books than dresses, a sensible proportion. Eamon turned toward her. "I would like to revise my original proposal." "You had no proposal. You had a request for labor disguised as marriage. Then I would like to make the first honest proposal." She waited. He had rehearsed the words and now distrusted all of them. "I love you," he said. "Not because you saved the cabin, though you did. Not because you found the fraud, though you did that too. I love you because you see the whole of a problem and still make room for the people trapped inside it. You are the first person who has ever stood beside me without asking me to become smaller so you could feel larger." Sabine's face changed. Eamon continued, "I cannot promise ease. I cannot promise that the lodge will succeed or that the pass will remain valuable. I can promise that no contract, account, or decision concerning this land will be made without you. I can promise that your name will stand beside mine. And I can promise never again to confuse needing someone with owning their labor." The river moved far below. Sabine looked toward the peaks. "My mother said marriage reveals whether a man wants a witness to his life or an audience for it. What did your father want? A partner. He forgot it occasionally. She reminded him. I may require reminders. You certainly will. Eamon waited. Sabine faced him. Yes, she said. He blinked. Yes? Yes, Eamon. I will marry you. He smiled so suddenly that she laughed. The sound carried across the pass. They married in May beside the river. Constable Venn performed the ceremony because he claimed his office technically allowed it, though no one was entirely certain. Cecily Rusk returned as a witness. Lucan Meyer, released after cooperating with the fraud investigation, attended with a cane and a new coat. He had found work with an independent freight company and brought a young hound as a wedding gift. Eamon knelt beside the animal. This one better have sense. Lucan smiled nervously. She has more than I do. That is a low measure. Sabine named the hound Ledger. Construction on the lodge began that summer. The company settlement took months, but Rusk secured an advance for Eamon's destroyed property. Local trappers contributed labor in exchange for future lodging and storage. Freight crews hauled glass, nails, hinges, and a small iron stove. Sabine designed the storehouse with 2 locks and duplicate inventory books. Eamon built bunks, corrals, and a covered repair bay. They called the place Cold Water Station. The first winter, only 7 traveling parties used it. The second winter, 23 did. By the third year, the station had a stable, blacksmith shed, kitchen, 6 guest rooms, and a common room where travelers ate stew beneath a ceiling blackened by honest smoke. Sabine managed freight records, supplies, toll agreements, and winter scheduling. Eamon maintained the pass, guided travelers, hunted, and oversaw repairs. Major decisions were made at the long table beneath the front window. They disagreed often. Sabine wanted larger grain reserves. Eamon wanted more stable space. Sabine believed travelers would pay for clean bedding. Eamon believed anyone crossing the mountains in January should be grateful for a roof. Sabine won that argument after 3 freight captains paid extra for sheets. Eamon won the argument over building a second bridge when the first survived the spring flood. Neither victory was permanent. They reviewed every decision at the end of each season and changed what the evidence required. Their marriage developed in much the same way. It was not built from constant agreement. It was built from the certainty that disagreement did not threaten respect. Eamon learned that Sabine became quiet when she was afraid, and sharp when she was exhausted. Sabine learned that Eamon repaired things when he did not know how to speak about grief. He rebuilt the same section of fence 3 times during the week he received news of his brother's death. She did not ask him to explain. She brought tools and worked beside him. Years later, travelers told stories about the winter Ambrose Pell tried to seize Coldwater Pass. The stories grew with each telling. Some claimed Sabine fought 20 armed men alone. Others said Eamon triggered an avalanche that buried an entire company patrol. One version gave Ledger the Hound a heroic role, despite the fact that she had not yet been born. Eamon corrected the stories when he heard them. There were fewer men, he would say. No avalanche. And Sabine did not do it alone. Sabine usually added, neither did Eamon. The truth was less dramatic and more important. 2 people had survived because they shared what each knew. Eamon understood the land, the weather, the animals, and the hidden paths through the valley. Sabine understood systems, records, logistics, and the habits of men who believed intelligence belonged only to them. Alone, either might have failed. Together, they saw the whole danger. Ambrose Pell was convicted of fraud, conspiracy, attempted arson, and unlawful seizure of property. The company dismissed several officers and lost its exclusive regional contract. Independent posts appeared along the freight routes, and trappers began demanding written receipts for every exchange. Constable Asa Venn remained in office long enough to become more careful than brave, which Sabine considered an improvement. Cecily Rusk continued auditing frontier stations until retirement. She and Sabine exchanged letters for 20 years. Lucan Meyer eventually became a freight captain. Every time he passed Coldwater Station, he brought something useful and refused payment for it. One autumn evening, Long after the lodge had become the safest winter station in the region, Eamon found Sabine seated at the old cabin table. The original cabin had been absorbed into the larger structure, but they had preserved its stone hearth and front room. The brass-clasped expedition ledger lay open before her. Her hair had begun to silver at the temples. "What are you writing?" he asked. "The annual account. We have clerks. They make errors. So do you. Mine are more interesting." He sat across from her. Outside, freight bells sounded near the stable. Travelers talked in the common room. Someone laughed in the kitchen. The valley that had once held only one failing trapper now sheltered dozens of people during the winter crossing. Sabine turned the ledger toward him. On the first page, beneath the old expedition notes and copied evidence against Pell, she had written a new heading: Coldwater Station, Joint Holding of Eamon and Sabine Vale. Below it, she had recorded the first year's supplies, income, repairs, and losses. Eamon touched the faded ink. "You kept all of it?" "Of course. Even the first account, especially the first." "Why?" "Because memory softens danger after survival. Records prevent us from pretending the lesson was easier than it was." He looked at the shelves, the strong walls, and the warm light coming from the adjoining hall. "What lesson do you think it was?" Sabine closed the ledger. "That people are most easily controlled when they are ashamed of needing help." Eamon considered that. "And when they stop being ashamed, they become difficult to own." He smiled. "You were always difficult." "Yes, I am grateful." She reached across the table and took his hand. Outside, snow began falling over Coldwater Pass. It covered the freight road, the rebuilt smokehouse, the stable roofs, and the narrow ravine where Pell's men had once believed two isolated people would be easy to defeat. But the valley was no longer isolated. Lanterns burned along the trail. Food waited in the storehouse. Spare blankets lay folded near the hearth. Every traveler who arrived at the station found warmth, fair prices, accurate accounts, and a place where no person's desperation was treated as an opportunity for theft. Eamon had once believed survival meant enduring everything alone. Sabine had taught him otherwise. Real strength was not the refusal to need another person. It was the courage to choose someone worthy of trust, to listen when pride preferred silence, and to build a life in which each person's ability made the other more capable. The lesson of their story was carried through the mountains long after their names faded from the freight ledgers. Intelligence should never be mistaken for disobedience. Partnership should never be confused with ownership. And no hardship is made lighter by facing it alone when honest hands are willing to share the weight.